Hello, and welcome to the Human Research Protection course. This module covers a discussion of the informed consent process in research. Informed consent is about people's understanding and willingness to participate in your study and not about signing a form. Prospective participants in your research study must understand the purpose, the procedures, the potential risks, and benefits of their involvement, and their alternatives to participation. Making an informed decision about participating in research includes having an understanding of the possible risks and benefits to their involvement, and knowing absolutely that they do not have to volunteer and can withdraw at any time. Now let's consider the ethical principles established in the Belmont Report. The Belmont Report was written by the National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects of Biomedical and Behavioral Research. Its full title is the Belmont Report: Ethical Principles and Guidelines for the Protection of Human Subjects of Research. Report of the National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects of Biomedical and Behavioral Research. The report was issued on the 30th day in September of 1978. Let's review the concept of being a volunteer. The Belmont Ethical Principle of Respect for Persons. This principle incorporates at least two ethical convictions. First, that individuals should be treated as autonomous agents. And second, that persons with diminished autonomy are entitled to protection. The principle of respect for persons thus divided into two separate moral requirements: the requirement to acknowledge autonomy and the requirement to protect those with diminished autonomy. Please answer as true or false. One requirement for Psychology 101 is participation in a study on learning practices. This violates the principle of autonomy. The correct answer is true. Participation should not be a class requirement. Let's review another Belmont principle: beneficence. Persons are treated in an ethical manner not only by respecting their decisions and protecting them from harm, but also by making efforts to secure their well-being. Such treatment falls under the principle of beneficence. Two general rules have been formulated as complementary expressions by beneficent actions in this sense. 1. Do not harm, and 2. Maximize possible benefits and minimize possible harms. Investigators and members of their institutions are obligated to give forethought to the maximization of benefits and the reduction of risks that might occur from the research investigation. Here's another question. Answer true or false. Some patients in your research study develop serious psychological reaction to the study questions. You decide to stop the research for further evaluation. This is a case of beneficence. The correct answer is true. Beneficence means that it is the obligation of the researcher to do no harm to the participants. The reevaluation of this study is essential. Our last Belmont ethical principle is justice. Let's define. It is ensuring reasonable, non-exploitative, and well-considered procedures are administered fairly. The fair distribution of research costs and benefits to potential research participants and equally. The investigator should consider the following when selecting prospective participants. Participants should not be selected due to class, socioeconomic status, or race unless justified by study objectives. Women have been underrepresented in certain research studies because of the risk associated with childbearing. Now researchers must justify why women are not included in a study population. Failure to provide scientifically sound argument for the exclusion of one gender is grounds for denial. An existing counselor-client relationship requires consideration of the potential for power-based coercion when expanding that relationship to include investigator subject. Provision or adjustments might need to be made to attempt to equalize the roles. Teacher-student relationships always carry a perception of inequality in roles. The informed consent process should reflect the precautions taken to balance the relationship and guard against even the perception of coercion. Answer true or false. A group of prison inmates are identified for a study on mental health services for prisoners and parolees. Their participation is voluntary. This is acceptable. The correct answer is true. The prisoner or parolees are volunteers, and the study involves the situation of services offered in the prison and for parolees. The responsibility to protect and inform research participants is ultimately the principal investigators and cannot be ignored or delegated. Although the PI may delegate various tasks to certain team members, the PI cannot delegate the responsibility of protecting and informing participants of their rights. Because informed consent is an ongoing process, it starts before any forms are signed, and it continues through the completion of the subject's involvement in the study. The consent document is only a confirmation of the consent process. A copy of the consent document is reviewed by the IRB before it is presented to prospective participants. Now, let's review the elements of consent required by federal regulations. State the purpose of the research and give a fair explanation of your research procedures. Experimental procedures must also be identified. Explain tasks and procedures from the participant's point of view, that is, what will he or she be expected to do? Estimate the total amount of time for the person involved in the study. Explain the frequency of procedures and include any additional costs or charges for the research procedures with estimated amounts. State why the individual is eligible to participate or what criteria will be used to determine eligibility. Describe any foreseeable risks or discomforts the subject will bear. Include all reasonably common risks as well as potentially serious risks, and if possible, indicate the likelihood of occurrence. Risks may range from inconvenience to bodily pain. Do not overlook soft risks such as confidentiality and embarrassment. Decisions about invasive procedures will always involve a degree of uncertainty regarding the harmful effects. Calculating the probability that these situations will occur can aid in explaining the risks. Describe any benefits to the participant or others that can reasonably be expected. Benefits may range from feeling good about participation to monetary compensation to free access to an experimental drug. Be careful, however, not to oversell any benefits. Calculate the probability that these beneficial effects will occur. This will aid in determining the weight given to the benefits. If there are no benefits, clearly state this. The consent document must describe the terms of any payment used to compensate individuals for their participation. This includes the conditions under which research participants would receive partial payment or no payment at all. A disclosure of appropriate alternative procedures or courses of treatment, if any, that might be advantageous to the participation. A statement describing the extent, if any, to which confidentiality of records identifying the subject will be maintained. Conflict of interest, COI, is a situation where a faculty or staff member is in a position to influence the business, research, or other decisions of the university in relationship to an outside organization that could lead directly or indirectly to financial gain for that individual or the family of that individual, or give improper advantages to the others to the detriment of the university. Investigators involved in the conduct of research generally complete a disclosure treatment for the institution and the IRB that describes their financial relationship with the sponsor of their research. Many IRBs are including a statement in the informed consent form which notifies the prospective research participant of this relationship, which is generally labeled, "The investigator of your study is supported by the sponsor." An explanation of whom to contact for answers to pertinent questions about the research and research subject's rights, and whom to contact in the event of a research-related injury to the participant. Questions about research are frequently best answered by the investigators. However, questions about the rights of research subjects or research-related injuries, where applicable, may best be referred to those not on the research team. These questions could be addressed to the IRB, an ombudsman, an ethics committee, or other informed administrative body. Therefore, each consent document can be expected to have at least 2 names with local telephone numbers for contacts to answer questions in these specified areas. Indicate whether compensation or medical treatment will be available if the participant becomes injured. Include that the compensation or treatment consists of and where further information regarding research-related injury can be obtained for research involving physical contact or activity. It is important not to overlook the need to point out that no penalty or loss of benefits will occur as a result of not participating or withdrawing at any time. It is equally important to alert potential subjects to any foreseeable consequences to them should they unilaterally withdraw while dependent on some intervention to maintain normal function. Emphasize that the individual may discontinue participation at any time without penalty or loss of benefits. If there are limits or risks involved in withdrawal, such as danger to the participant's well-being, these must also be clearly explained. Let's answer another question, true or false. Jonah, a graduate student in psychology, informs his participants about the purpose and procedures of his study on visual creativity and mentions that there are some risks and benefits too. Has he apprised them of all the required information according to the consent process? The correct answer is false. According to the informed consent process, Jonah must tell his participants about the specific risks and benefits of being in this study, as well as their alternatives to participation in the research. Discussions with prospective participants should take place with sufficient time for them to consider participation. Approaching them on the same days the study would take place may not be sufficient. Participants may need time to think about their decision or discuss their involvement with family, friends, or religious advisors. For best results, participants should be approached when they are willing to listen and are open and ready to consider consenting. The process of obtaining consent should include time for both discussion and reflection, as shown in the following steps. First, obtain approval from the IRB. Present the prospective participant with the consent document. Reading through the document together, taking time to explain significant or difficult points about the research or participation. Answer any questions. Be certain to discuss risks, benefits, and alternative therapies in addition to purposes and procedures. Give the prospective participant a copy of the consent document. Allow the participant time to take the document home and discuss participation if desired with family and friends. Meet with the participant again and ask open-ended questions about the nature of the study and participation to make certain he or she understands correctly. If the participant is willing, have him or her sign the consent document. Let's answer another true or false question. Megan O'Connell volunteers to participate in a complex research study that has several risks associated with it. When she arrives to participate, she is told to read and sign a consent form. The researcher in this study has followed the correct informed consent process. The correct answer is false. Megan should not be asked to sign a consent document on the day of the study. The researcher should have talked with Megan before the study day, given her time to ask questions and to discuss her participation with her family, friends, or religious leaders. If your document is not understandable, a claim could be made that the participant did not understand what was signed. A consent document must be made readable without compromising the content. Direct it at an 8th grade reading level. Use simple, straightforward sentences. Use commonly recognizable terms and measurement amounts. Avoid the use of jargon or technical language and explain terms that may not be easily understood. Study participants cannot be excluded based on language barriers. If you have a participant who does not understand the language of the consent document, you must present a translated consent document or arrange for a qualified interpreter to translate your explanation and questions from the participant. Remember that the consent process is bidirectional. Researchers should answer participants' questions and ask questions too. Use open-ended and non-directive questions. Open-ended questions often begin with the words such as what, where, how often, when, and please describe. A few of the questions you may want to ask are: describe in your own words the purpose of the study. What more would you like to know? Would you please explain to me what you think we're going to ask you to do? And what are your concerns? Here's another question answered true or false. Dr. Chu asked her prospective participants, "Do you understand what we are asking you to do for this research?" This is the best way to assess their understanding. The correct answer is false. Dr. Chu is not using an open-ended question. A better way to ask this question would be, "I want to be sure that I am thorough in my explanation of the study. Can you describe for me what you think will be asked of you during this study?" Respect for persons requires that subjects, to the degree that they are capable, be given the opportunity to choose what shall or shall not happen to them. Coercion occurs when an overt threat of harm is intentionally presented by one person to another in order to obtain compliance. Undue influence, by contrast, occurs through an offer of an excessive, unwarranted, inappropriate, or improper reward or other overture in order to obtain compliance. Also, inducements that would ordinarily be acceptable may become undue influence if the subject is easily vulnerable. This concludes the module on informed consent.